So my name is Khalila Gambrell. For those who don't know me, I'm the lead product owner for Olio. And I'm going to kick things off with regard to the data import WOLFcon update. So this session will focus on what we are doing right now with some progress, and you'll hear from Anne-Marie, Alameda, and Kathleen about our efforts. Hang on for a minute. 1 second. So that's this agenda here. We're going to try to leave time for questions because I would assume there's a few questions. So I wanted to start my quick overview by just putting this out here, that data import stabilization and improvements are critical. We know they're critical, and what you will hear from Alameda, Anne-Marie, and Kathleen are about what we're doing to live up to this statement here. And here are the teams that are working on data import at this moment. We have Anne-Marie and Ryan Taylor's team of FullJet, my team, and Christine Schultz-Richards' team of Spitfire that work on data import. You have the data import task force team that Kathleen Moore will talk about, and that's the team, sorry, I'm a little too tall for this mic, that will talk about reliability. And what that team is working on, it's a time box team that's working on improvements to reliability, but she'll talk more about what they're doing in that area. And then there's Martin Tran, or who I like to call Marty Mart, who will work on performance task force, who leads the performance task force team. And that team is experimenting with Aurora serverless. Please do not ask me what that means. Please reach out to Martin or ask Alameda. I'm sure he may know, unless I put Alameda on the spot. And also working on optimizing data import configurations. And also the EBSCO Folio hosting team is also working on how to experiment with improving performance and configurations as well. They're working in collaboration with PTF or the Performance Task Force team. And again, this is all about addressing the challenges that we heard from several libraries that were part of the RLIF report. As these are some of the issues that the libraries reported, and that's what we're working to address. With that, I pass it on to Anne-Marie.
All right, and my part's going to be fairly short because we want to spend some time with Alameda and Kathleen and some of the work that they're doing. On Thursday, we're going to talk a bit about the work that's going on in Hobby and what we're thinking about for Questdalia. But for today, I wanted to just highlight some of the key critical service patches that we've released recently for Orchid, and then a couple more that we are expecting will get released. And so with Orchid, one of the things that we've heard quite a bit is being able to reuse the same match and action profiles multiple times in the same job profile. And we released a short-term fix for this in Service Patch 3, but we know that we need to make a better fix to it, but we wanted to get something out at least. And so right now, as long as your match and your action are the same and in the same sequence, you can use that kind of group of profiles multiple times in the same job profile. And so it's tiny, I know, that this job profile is set up so that if I match, then go ahead and perform several actions. And if I don't match, go ahead and perform several actions that are the same. What we know we need to do is make it so that you could have different sequences of actions or different actions based under the same match or the same sub-match, but we wanted to get some sort of fix out. The other thing that is is a little bit specialized, but it came up from 5 colleges. They often will have multiple actions that are for the same record type in the same profile. So instead of having a create holdings or update holdings that has 3 or 4 fields filled in, they may have several separate profiles that are touching different fields of the holdings record, and they want to stack those up in different sequences or different groups of fields depending on what a particular profile means. And what they discovered is that for holdings and items, after the second action for the same record type, when you try to do the third or the fourth, it didn't like the third action and passed that. And so we released in Service Patch 4 a fix so that the third and subsequent actions for the same record type will work now instead of getting stuck. And in Service Patch 5 that just got released last week, we did the same thing for items. Another one that has come up from several libraries, this particularly comes up in situations where you are storing the electronic access info in your holdings and or item records, and you have multiple 856s, particularly for different providers. What we were finding was that if there were 3 or 4 856s, the link and then the text that goes with the link were getting mixed up. And the best example was one where there were 2 links for Project News and 2 links for JSTOR, and the link text for JSTOR ended up next to the Project News links and vice versa. So now we are maintaining the right text with the right links. So we're keeping all the data for one particular 856 associated properly. And then our good friends at National Library of Australia, they started working in folio, and they immediately found a crazy issue that we had not anticipated between Dennis Bridges and myself. So the National Library of Australia in their organizations has about 83,000 organizations. I don't think we have any folio library that has more than about 20,000 max. Library of Congress said they all have about 50,000 max. We have National Library of Australia with 83,000. So we can't count that high. We pretty much were maxing at about 20,000. And that was causing problems in the organization's searching and lookups. It was also causing problems when data import was trying to look up organizations to assign them into orders that were being created through data import. So Thunderjet made some changes to make sure that all the organizations are retrieved when there's a search. There are now 81,000 plus organizations in Orchid Bug Fest, in case anybody wants to go look for them. And data import has made some changes so that if you are creating orders and we have to do a lookup for the organization to put that into the order vendor field, that we can now get through searching all the vendors without time. So that just went out in Service Patch 5. We're anxiously awaiting that being deployed to NLA so that they can confirm that it's working properly. We did a lot of testing, and PTF has a kind of a clone of the NLA environment. We're reasonably confident it works, but we want to hear from NLA first. And hopefully we will not end up with more than 80,000 vendors. Although I think we're guaranteed up to about 99,000 now. And then this was a pretty frustrating data issue. One of the things that WOLFcon has taken on in the past few months is some of the working inventory. And so not anything having to do with data import, but just in general, one of the actions that you can do with an item record is duplicate it. And someone discovered that if the item record that you're duplicating had circulation history on it, then the new item record that was created would have that circulation history of 2, which of course it just got created, it hasn't circulated. So that was fixed in Service Patch 4. Not really a good way to go back and fix it in things that may have been duplicated previously, but hopefully it won't continue to happen. And then we have a few other ones that are gonna be coming, probably in early September, early to mid-September. We have been doing some work on mark-to-mark matches, and we need to do a bit more testing of it, but particularly for repeatable fields and making sure that we're matching the way that we should for repeatable fields. There were some changes made a couple months ago that have to do with the table of item records that are under a holdings on an instance detail view. And particularly when there are thousands of items under a holdings, they weren't really working well. And so there were some changes made to make those work better, but those changes introduced a couple of problems that Cornell stumbled across. Biggest one for Cornell is that the column headers that you used to be able to sort by in that item table are not sortable. And if you're trying to find 1 out of 15,000 items that is something that's been paged that you need to go find in your remote storage, you want to be able to sort by the status column. So we're aiming to get that fixed. And then there's one other thing with item records, circulation notes. Sometimes when you import and you're trying to populate the circulation note field, it will have a problem and it will create a situation in the item record where you can no longer edit the item record in the UI. So somebody has to go in and fix the item record behind the scenes to basically unlock it to make it so that you can edit it. Obviously, that is not a good situation, so we want to make sure that that's not. So those are the critical service patches for Oregon. This is our first release that we've been doing critical service patches, and it's a bit of a different process from what we were doing previously. We're still kind of working the cobwebs out of the system a little bit, but we've been doing a lot of trying to keep it organized in Jira and everywhere. And I'll also mention, because I forgot to tell Dalila, we have already uploaded this presentation, the PowerPoint, to the SCED description of our session in case anybody needs it, so you don't have to take pictures of all the slides. So next up is going to be Olamide, who came to EBSCO about a year ago. And we are delighted to have him as the architect for FoliJet and for data import. And he talks more technical than I can, but he is going to give some updates on some of the things we've done and we will be doing in relation to the architecture for data import.
Thanks, Anne-Marie.
All right, you gotta speak either louder or you're going to wait.
Hi everyone, my name is Olamide Kolawole. I'm a systems architect with Folio. I liaise with the FoliJet and FoliJet teams, and my primary areas are data imports and consortia, which I've heard a lot about recently. Here is the critical changes we've made for the Orchid CSPs as well as RP. I'm going to try and describe them as as simple as I can. The first is the mark source 601. That involves mark record safe optimization. So most job profiles that we create, one of the very first steps is to take that incoming record and save that in SRS. To save it in SRS, there's some data transformation that occurs to be able to match on the table. So when you create a job profile and you say match on 0.5, SRS needs to create sort of a new data structure for those processes, and that transformation is very expensive. So expensive that it can take over the capacity of, let's say, the database in a multi-tenant system. So you have 10 tenants, and one person is running the import. You could see, other parts of the application suffering, or other tenants saying, hey, check-in and check-out is slow, and that's because the database is working really hard to save this data. So in the latest CSP, we have some optimization to get that to a better state, and that has improved reliability by quite a large sum. So you see, prior to this, you can see timeout errors or some weird Java exceptions that are not easily reproducible. So this aims to mitigate that a little bit. Up next is a mod source 641. So for this one, let's say you have a fancy job profile, and at some point you have some match errors or some exceptions. Depending on where the error is generated, the database connection that was servicing that particular record does not have its transaction closed, and actually just hangs in there until the database decides to close it, or some other networking events goes on. So we found this issue. It was related to a third-party library, and we needed to upgrade to the latest version. They had fixed it in a third-party library. So what this means is, previously, if you have a job that had a bunch of errors, and then you had other jobs coming after that, they had reduced number of connections to be able to operate with, because the first job took, let's say, out of a pool of 30 connections, 20 connections are just hanging out, not doing anything, while everything else is focused on the 10. So either you see really slow performance, or just instability in the database. So with this change, it's possible to have data import jobs fail gracefully, and still have capacity for other jobs coming on besides there. And then mod source 676, that's database query retry. So there are times where you have a job, there are no user errors, but for some reason, your 10,000 record job, there's only one job in there that fails and has like a timeout. That is not fault of your own. In concert with mod source 601, the very first one where I mentioned the database capacity really being low, there are times where other processes would say, hey, I want to do something with the database, and then they time out because a request isn't able to get back to them fast enough. So what this change is to say, retry the action you're trying to do. So maybe the first time you get a timeout, or there's some exceptional networking events going on. Most likely, the second time you try that, things will be stable, so that we can have more confidence to say, I have a 10,000 record job and it's completed to the end, and I don't need to go fish through my my file that I tried to import into there, take out the record and try to get it in. And I want to mention, Folio has a bunch of modules, so these changes are on specific modules. So with mod source 676, this is on the SRS mod source record storage. And then mod SARMAN 989, get that feeling where you feel if you give data import a 50,000 record file is going to fail, but if you give it 100, it will generally work a lot better. That's because there is no restriction in the number of concurrent processing going on. The situation prior to this thing was that if you give data import 100 records, it tries to process all 100 at the same time. So you have a database connection, a pool of, let's say, 20, and you have 100 things looking to get access to that pool. Eventually, some will error out, and then with changes in mod source 601, the very first one, that taking a long time. So the data import job just builds out on really large jobs. The idea is to say whether 1 or 100 or a million, process it one at a time, or 2 at a time, or 3 at a time. So definitely it could take longer, but we know that the job is going to complete you know, by the time you come into the office, in the morning. So that is on, Source Record Manager, SRM. There will still need to be changes in other participants of the data import process, whether that's inventory or acquisitions. But SRM is a critical node in the data import infrastructure, and it's one of the first modules that we exhibit, trying to say process too many things at the same time. So changes in those two those two tickets is to constrain to say, hey, you know, I'm giving you 1 million records, just process 20 at a time because we have 20 connected in the database pool and not building proportionally. And with that, it's happening. Yeah.
Thanks, Mohammed. I'm Kathleen Moore, product owner working on the data import task force. And so I'll talk to you a little bit today about some of the short-term changes that we've been making to improve data import. So the main thing that we've been working on is the ability to reliably process large MRC files by auto-slicing those files and processing the source file parts. So I think most people in here, if you experience that import, you know that loading large files into the system isn't reliable. It's labor intensive, time consuming, and it needs to be done off hours to avoid negatively affecting the system. So the goal of the changes that we're making here is to allow somebody to upload a large MRC file. So, you know, more than 100,000 records at a time, and do that at the end of the workday. And the idea is that the system will automatically slice that file for you, and come the next morning, your file will be processed and it won't have negatively affected the system. So the way that we're accomplishing that is 4 main improvements. The first is you're improving the way that you upload a file. And so this initial part is there's going to be no difference to the end user. It's going to follow the same flow that you're used to in the UI, but it's going to make it more reliable. So we're going to be directly uploading files to S3-like buckets instead of using local storage. So you'll start the process, you know, exactly as you would previously. The second thing that we're going to be doing is that auto slicing of files. And so this is something that's configurable in terms of how many records are going to be in each part of the file. And the idea here is that we're going to automate the slicing into smaller optimal parts so that the rest of the system can process these files. We're including some UI updates that I'll show visual of to sort of connect the idea of these parent and child jobs. And so you can see how they're connected as they go out, as they go through the data import process. Sort of the best way that I can think to visualize, which is sort of a gross visualization, is that with data import right now, imagine you've got a big piece of steak and you just shove it in your mouth and you try to chew it and swallow it. It's not going to end very well. So this new system, cutting out that piece of steak, I'm sure that you'll still find a way to be able to choke on it, but the idea is that in much more manageable slices, you'll be able to get through that. We're also going to be introducing the idea of queue management, and this won't actually be a queue that users see, but the idea is that, again, this is going to be highly configurable, and it'll allow the system to let small files. So, you know, you've got 10 records, you've got 20 records, 100 records, you know, whatever value is configured that can jump up higher in the queue so that they don't get stuck behind a large job and end up waiting hours for a critical workflow. That's also going to be cross-tenant storage, so it's going to reflect all activity across the cluster. And I have a slide, a couple slides up that'll show a little more about that. And then the last thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna enable parallel processing. And so essentially we'll be able to run several instances of data import in parallel as desired to be able to scale up. And that's going to be possible because of the changes that we made to the upload process going into S3. So on the top part of this slide, this is the existing process when you are, once you start processing a file. So you've chosen your file, you've uploaded it, you chose the job profile and you click run on it. And that's what the black box in the top left corner is showing. You get a little progress card in the UI on the left telling you how that upload is going. The card is updated as that job goes along with a little indicator. And eventually that job will appear in the log, and your card will disappear, and your file will hopefully have completed successfully. So in this new process, it's going to start in the same way, where you've got your initial file that you upload, you click run, and you're going to see a single card reflecting all of the parts. So if that file is split into 4 parts, you wouldn't see 4 cards, you just see 1, but it'll contain information about those 4 parts. As the job progresses, similar to before, that card will be updated to show the progress. So it's going to give you indicators of how many parts have completed, how many parts there are total, if any parts have failed or have completed with errors. So you'll have some visibility into those individual parts. As those job parts finish processing, they will appear in the logs, so you don't have to wait for the entire large file to finish processing. You'll be able to see each of those job parts appear in the log. Once all of the parts associated with the file are complete, same as before, the card will disappear, and then the processing will be complete. And so to give you a visual of what that's actually going to look like, and hopefully this is large enough for people to see here. So on the left here in the red box, we've got that sort of the parent card that shows the main file. It's got the same information as existing data import jobs would have. And what we've added on is at the bottom, the job parts remaining, 38 out of 50 in this case, job parts processed, 12 out of 50 in this case. So it'll show you how many have completed with errors, and failed. So the idea is that it's to give you a quick look at how the job is progressing so that you can see it all in one place. Some other minor UI changes that we're making on this page. You'll see here, at the end of these file names, we're adding an indicator of what job part they are, so that there's some distinction between however many parts the original file is broken into. We've also are adding a column here with the job parts, so that you can see its job part, 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10. In the case that a file is not split, it would just be 1 out of 1. So you can see a few examples of that here. Another thing that I'll just sort of highlight on this screen, since we have the visual, is that you can see all of these parts are processed in order. So the first part will be processed prior to the second part, prior to the third. But other jobs might be interspersed between them, so that you won't necessarily see them all sequentially in the log. So it'll be the order that they are processed that you'll see them. If a user wants to cancel a job, because we'll have that single card where canceling is initiated, we're going to present a modal. And again, the previous process has a modal as well. This one's just going to have a little bit of additional information explaining, any of the parts that have already processed can't be canceled, parts that are in progress. The parts that have already processed of those can't be canceled. but anything that has not yet been processed will be canceled. So it's just trying to detail out, what the implications of a user actually canceling a job at this point would mean. Trying to sort of balance that without providing too much text in a modal. So, you know, if your job is split into 50 parts, and you want to cancel it, you don't have to go into 50 individual cards and cancel it. You can do it all from this one view. Talking just a little bit about the queue management and prioritization. What I have on the left here is a screenshot. It is linked in the PowerPoint, the notes in the PowerPoint. It is also available on the wiki. But it is a really excellent visualization to see how the queue can be configured and what that would mean for like different scenarios. Essentially, job parts are dynamically ordered to make sure that it's a fair distribution of jobs. And there's several different ways that you can customize how that happens. So job size. So, you know, we can make sure that smaller records, jobs with smaller number of records can pop up higher in the queue to be processed. Age, we don't want jobs to sit for a long time because they're on the larger side. And so if a job has been sitting there too long, then that would increase its prioritization. Tenant usage. So the idea, if you're in a multi-tenant environment, we wouldn't want a single tenant to take up all the capacity for processing. And so it's trying to balance it out so that other tenants get their jobs processed. And part number, this is making sure that we're staying in the order that the file is split so that your records maintain that order. I highly recommend playing around with this interactive little view. It's a really nice visualization, and you can see what it's like if you add different job sizes. So the job size in this case would be the number of records, how long it's been on the queue, what tenant it's with. And if you play around with the configuration on it, you can see how that would impact the order of processing. This might be a little bit hard to see, but I know the question has come up of what happens with single record imports that are initiated from inventory. And the short answer is that they are not impacted from this process. So in the top left portion of the flow, that's where all of the splicing and queuing logic lives. The lower red portion is where inventory single record imports would come into this process. And so those inventory single record jobs are still going to bypass everything as they do now. So that's a totally separate thing than the area that the task force has been working in for the processing. And then the last area that I want to show is that once you have your job in the log, we're going to provide a link to the part as a mark file so that you can go in, you can look at it, you can troubleshoot it, you can download that mark file. So, you know, if we split your initial file into 50 parts, you don't have to try to do some complicated math to figure out what records that is in your initial file. You can see right here, you can click on it, download it, and find those record numbers. And so, you know, our goal is to save a lot of manual time that people are spending splitting up their files into smaller parts by doing it automatically for them, but then also providing the tools that you can see what records were in what part and further investigate if you need to.
Oh, no.
Okay, back off camera.
Okay. Stand up. Okay, so what you can see from the work that Olamide and Kathleen were showing and the various teams that Kalila showed, there is a ton of stuff happening around data import. And we are always interested in making sure that the community is involved. The functionality for being able to create orders from incoming markets had the best user acceptance testing and participation that I've had for any of the user acceptance testing that I've managed for data import. And we are currently doing user acceptance testing for a new piece of functionality we're going to be releasing in Copy, where from one bibliographic record, you can create or update multiple holdings and items. And so anybody who has that bit of functionality that you typically will have in your workflow, we would love to have you test it. We are gonna, if we have time on Thursday, we're gonna take some time and do some group user acceptance testing for that. And we would love to have as much feedback as possible. We said we were gonna stop the test on Friday of last week, but we've extended it for a week so that we could intersect with WOLFcon and get more feedback on it. About 6 months ago, maybe, before Duke left the project, Aaron Nedepi and a group of data import SMEs looked at the documentation that we have in the tips and tricks section of the Folio Wiki. And basically they have reorganized it to be more in keeping with what they felt like is useful for libraries that are working with data import. After Aaron left, we haven't had a lot of movement in that section. And so if you have time and interest, please either let me know, let folks from MMSIG know. I know that Laura is looking for people to help with the official documentation for all of the various areas that MMSIG is involved with. And so one of the most important things I think for our community is now that we have so much functionality, we need documentation, we need examples, we need FAQs, we need to be able to help the new people that are trying to use this functionality. One of the sections that was new in tips and tricks was a profile sharing section where different libraries were sharing profiles that they thought other libraries might be able to use. So if everybody is loading a batch of Springer records every 6 months, then can you maybe have one sample profile as a way to copy instead of everybody having to figure out what they want to do. We also have a section and there's a hot link in the PowerPoint for reporting problematic error messages in the UI. We've been working on trying to make those messages in the log more understandable so that when you encounter one of those messages, you know why there was a problem with the record or with the job. I definitely have a good list that people have sent. That's one of the things we're going to be analyzing as we start to plan the Quesnalia work over the next few weeks. So please continue to add there. And then testing is one of those areas where we have a lot of effort going on around testing, and the community sees some of it, but you don't necessarily see all of it. The developers, the back-end and the front-end developers write unit tests whenever they write new code or revise existing code to make sure that the guts, the basic code does what it's supposed to do. But then we also have a lot of UI-oriented tests. And for, folks that have worked in test rail, the tests that are labeled as smoke or critical path, so the most important tests, if these don't work, Folio is not working in this particular app. There's been an effort over the last couple of years to start to automate those. And so there are QAs who are taking those tests and writing them as automated tests, and they run every day. And if there's a problem, we get notified about it. And so that has helped us catch when we have regressions. It's helped us catch when systems go down. Similar thing with karate tests, which are not UI based, they're API backend based. But again, those run every day so that we can know if something has gone sideways. We still have thousands of manual tests and test rail though that are not automated. We are never going to get them all automated. We look at all of the extended tests that are in test rail. And so we're always interested in folks participating in BugFest. So the next one will be Poppy BugFest. And at least in data import, I got to the point where I could not keep up with the new stories and writing all of the new tests. We now have manual QAs who help us, so I can write the kind of outline of the test, and then the manual QA will do all the cleanup work on that. But there is a period of time where I had written some draft tests that basically was the name of the test and a link to the JIRA. And at one point, we had folks from NSA who were going in and completing those tests and test rail. That effort kind of fell by the side. All of you people who have lots of extra time not being used in your day jobs, feel free to pick up a few of those. So we appreciate all of the testing that y'all do. We have so many different threads of testing that are going on, but the most important testing, I think, is the testing that the community does. And the scenarios that y'all who do this work every day provide are always going to be better scenarios than what I can come up with or what the developers can come up with. So having what is a real life scenario for when do I need to update multiple holdings and items based on one incoming marked bibliographic record is much better than what I would be able to come up with on myself. So that's my little plea. Like I said, on Thursday, we're going to be doing some user acceptance testing at the very end of WOLFcon. 3:30 to 5 is our second data import session on Thursday. And we would love to have you all with us. We are going to talk Poppy and Quasnalia, and we'll see what we get to. And I'm not sure if we have anything else. So, questions? Comments? Yes.
Do I have a mic or?
We have this one.
Data import, the future looks brighter than ever. Will there be any changes on the data APIs from today with the new versions? Or do we need to rewrite our current code?
Good question. So the question is, will there be any changes to the APIs that might trigger people having to rewrite any things that they've done locally? Is there a change in the API for the upload? Olamide is saying no. So do we know of any changes?
I think we're mostly adding new APIs.
Oh, there are some new APIs being added, Ethelyn's telling me. Anything that you can think of, Olamide? Okay. There are there's not API changes, but in addition to everything that's been talked about today, there are other changes coming related to some of what Mobius was talking about this morning. We'll get into more of that a little bit on Thursday. Other questions, other comments? I don't know where we are for time. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, probably most people here are already know this, but I noticed something in the presentation. She mentioned that, single record, that one there was that one you just passed, the single record import bypasses
Yes,
mod data import. Does that mean that single record import cannot take advantage of any of the sort of transformations that you can build into a profile?
no.
It cannot.
No, it doesn't mean that, they can. So the question was if the inventory single record import bypasses the entry point that the regular data import jobs have, can it take advantage of the various kinds of things that you can do with the more complex data import jobs? As of Orchid, we made a change so that you can, not just have one data import job profile for creating records with single record import and for updating, but you can have multiple and you can select which one you want to use when you go to import. So if you want the import to not only create an instance, but you want it to strip some of the junky 9xx fields that come along with OCLC records, or you want it to create a basic holdings record for your main library, or a placeholder item record, all of that you can do now with single record import jobs. The important thing about the bypass is that with the single record import jobs, you don't start by uploading them to the data import landing page. And so when you trigger that import from the inventory app, anything that's triggered in that fashion automatically gets a higher priority than anything that's triggered from the data import app. And that's because typically when you're doing those single record imports, you're either doing it to grab a record so that I can place an order on it right away, or I want to grab a record and update a brief record. And so you don't want to have to wait because there's some giant job happening in data import at the same time. So the single record imports and also the updates that happen when you save quick mark edits, those two things bypass the entry point that Kathleen was talking about for the regular data import jobs. I'll also just mention that the download of the MARC files that she mentioned for if a file has been split into parts and you need part 12 to see an error in that one thing, that's also going to apply for any of the files that go through the regular data import process, regardless of whether they were split or not. So if you have a 10 record file, it errors in some way and you want to check it, or you want to be able to have somebody look it up and check it, you're going to be able to download that file. I think that's going to help us a lot when we're trying to troubleshoot on behalf of hosted libraries or other situations where we're trying to understand what the file looks like before it hit folio. Yes.
Thank you for this presentation. I really appreciate all of this hard work. I guess my question is about a data import roadmap, and whether or not there's a document that lists, from a functionality perspective, what functionality data import supports and what it does not, and what is planned to be supported versus what is not planned to be supported. We just still have so many use cases that we can implement with the matching or the actions or the import profile logic. And it would help us to understand whether or not those use cases are intended to be supported, or if we need to, find alternate solutions.
Right. So the question was, what is the data import roadmap, particularly with regards to additional functionality that we haven't gotten to yet? And one of the things I want to say is when I started with data import and Bolajet started with data import, kind of didn't occur to me that we would end up with so many people working on it. If Spitfire hadn't started a few years ago, I don't know when we would have gotten to MARC authorities and MARC holdings and all the many updates to Quickmark that have happened. In terms of roadmap, I want to go back to Kalila's statement at the very beginning. The most important thing that we keep hearing over and over and over again from people is make it stable, make it fast, make it work. We are tired of it messing up. And so we are trying to stay focused on that. We are at the same time fixing as many bugs as we can. And then we have some obligations related to some of the new libraries that are coming on who have certain things that need to get done. All of that said, we are starting to plan Quesnelia now. And my coworker Ryan, who y'all will meet on Thursday, he and I are both going to be working with WOLFcon, and I think he's going to be taking the lead on some community involvement as far as looking at what the proposed features are for Quesnelia and how we might prioritize them. And so we'll talk more about that on Thursday. That's a lot of words, and part of that is to say we have some roadmap. We have a lot of architectural ideas that people have proposed. There's a lot of thinking around, are there ways to simplify what happens in source record storage and how records are stored there? That would be a good thing to do, but it's also, you know, it's kind of like pulling the engine out of the car while it's going down the highway. There's also conversations about what are we going to need to do to interact with BidFrame and have BidFrame and Mark stay in sync with each other, which fortunately is not going to be on WOLFcon, it's going to be on the BidFrame group. But we have some idea for Quesnelia, and I think we will have more idea as the next few months go by, what it looks like we could achieve in terms of the next kinds of functionality. Yeah.
Just a part two. Is there any list of functionality that should work? Because I think that sometimes we struggle with whether or not something is functionality that we're waiting for or functionality that should work, but it's a bug. That really is a struggle.
Good question. So the question was, is there a list somewhere of the functionality that does work versus the functionality that doesn't? I know a few that don't off the top of my head. I don't know that there's a comprehensive list anywhere. But I'll write that down. I'll see what I can do. Session.
Thank you. It's really exciting to see all this work coming together, lots of different paths. And one thing I'm curious about is the work to enable automatic chunking of incoming jobs. Seems like it may be useful in some situations, but it also sounds like it's in part there to address the limitation, the issue that everybody's having when jobs are currently too large. And there's been a magic number floating around 5,000, and sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less, as sort of a limit. And one thing I didn't catch from the earlier conversation about the various enhancements to SIS and other modules that use database connection and all that. Is that sort of a plan? Do you have a sense of where we end up with that limit at which you can require chunking breaking jobs? Because as you say, 50 jobs or 50 chunks is a lot of chunks if you've got a lot of records.
Right.
And I imagine that the 5,000 is something that can be improved. Where do you see that going?
So the question was, is the chunking partially a way to get around the fact that it feels like 5,000 is kind of the magic number in terms of the largest number of records that we can typically handle these days. And I think part of the research that went into the task force's work was that for most systems, there is an upper limit, and we are unclear how close or not close we are to that upper limit. But one of the things that is a different challenge, I think, for Folio than for some of the other systems is that Mark is one of our source formats, but then that gets transformed when it gets to inventory, when it gets to orders, in a way that it doesn't necessarily change in other systems. So we have I think the biggest payoff of the chunking is going to be that the library doesn't have to do it manually outside of Folio, and that if you try to put in a job with 50,000 records or 100,000 or 1,000,000, it's not going to fall over the way that it does now. And Kathleen has promised me you can start a 250,000, a 500,000 record file when you go home, and it will not fall apart overnight, right?
We're testing.
No pressure.
We verify the test.
Yes, and we're just about to the point where we can start testing on that. Did you say that the goal is to release that as actually an ORCID critical service patch? So you won't have to wait until the POPI release that's going to be in November, I think, for that functionality to be available. So the goal is to have it out by middle, late September. All right, lots of questions. Yes, sir.
Hi, regarding what you said about, Folio generating some files, I don't know if this applies exactly here, but the order app generates at the end of the cycle some like Folio format file, yeah, in order to be like a pre-cataloged file, but obviously you can't edit them. So we need to do like this clunky process of exporting, importing, to get the mark file, and then we have to replace those Folio generated files in order to edit them.
Yes, so I think what you're saying, and based on what Dennis and Joe have told me, you can take order and maybe invoice data out of Folio, but it comes out in JSON format. And JSON is not a friendly format to edit if you're not a developer. And so would there be a way to have a more friendly format? Definitely the files that we're talking about downloading for import are going to be MARC files. So if you sent in a file of 250,000 records and it's being chunked into 2,500, you're going to have 10 files that are just 2,500 MARC records. The plan is not to try to give you the JSON information. We do store the data in JSON internally, but that's not something that we intend to try to expose to y'all.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, I was just wondering if there are any other deeper architectural changes that are being considered or in the plan.
Come on Thursday. Rolanda is going to do a part 2 on Thursday. Yes. And the short answer is yes. And if you can't come on Thursday, because it is the last session of the conference, we will upload the PowerPoint once we have it finished in the next day or so to the SCAD session description. All right, it sounds like Khalil is telling me to wrap up. Anything else, please grab any one of us that talked today. And we've got the WOLFcon Slack channel. We've got the data import Slack channel. I saw Reagan is trying to do real work while we're all here at the conference. So please feel free to reach out to any of us. And I'm looking forward to y'all meeting Ryan on Thursday.